So the other day I did a video talking about just absolute no-brainer pickups for the PSP to start your PSP collection if you're kind of new to it or you were just never really familiar with the PSP library, and those included a lot of games that I personally know are extremely great and they don't break the bank either, which is pretty awesome. However, what I wanted to do today was kind of the opposite of that, where I talked about some of the lesser known titles from the PSP library, some of which I didn't even really have familiarity with until just recently, and after having played them, was like, how did I ever overlook this to begin with? Like, was this just not a very well marketed game back when it came out? So yeah, that's what I wanted to do today, was talk about some games that you might not know about for the PSP that might be worth checking out. And to start off, I want to talk about a game that I have not finished yet, and honestly I remember seeing this in stores and I completely overlooked it because I didn't really understand what it was, and the cover just didn't jump out to me very much. But in truth, it's actually the third entry in the Parasite Eve series, and that is The Third Birthday. Now, I've only played a little bit of this so far, but basically the combination of it being part of the Parasite Eve series, and the fact that it is more of an action-oriented title sort of kept me hooked in it, and the premise is kind of interesting too. You basically got this giant monster that's descended on Manhattan, there's some time travel involved, and at least in the brief time that I played it so far, it was interesting because in addition to having the kind of standard third-person action controls you would expect for a shooter like this, you also have the ability to jump into other people's bodies, since you are technically traveling in time, and take over those people and utilize whatever weapons and ammunition that they have on them at the time to continue to do damage with whatever foes that you're facing. Now, looking back at some of the critical reviews for it, it was not that well received, but at least in the time I spent with it, I really enjoyed the gameplay, so I'm not sure if it's going to be, an exceptional game by the time I roll credits on The Third Birthday, but it is one that I'm glad to have in the collection, and considering it is the third entry in Parasite Eve, which I really enjoyed the first one when I played and beat that, I only played a little bit of the second one as I recall, is enough to at least pique my curiosity and to make sure that it has a spot in my collection. Maybe one day I'll go back and actually finish Parasite Eve 2 and then do 3 and see, how many story connections there actually are. They might be minimal, they might be significant. I have no idea. All I know is that this was a game that I just completely overlooked when I first saw it on the shelves, and I have no idea that that's what it actually was, a continuation of the Parasite Eve story. So yeah, kind of a weird one if you're a fan of Parasite Eve and you're like, whatever happened to that? Did that ever have a third entry? Technically yes, just in a really weird place that you probably wouldn't have expected. Next up, and more purely on the RPG front, would be Brave Story from Xseed. Now, I picked this up predominantly because I was looking for a just standard turn-based RPG that I could enjoy on the PSP. It's not that those don't exist, right, but a lot of them are really expensive, especially when you start getting into like Persona territory, because Persona 3 is a hideously expensive game, but you can find Brave Story for anywhere from about 50 to 60 bucks right now on the secondary market. From the outset, it seems to have a pretty basic setup where you've got a friend who is hurt and in the hospital, and you get transported to a magical land, and you are trying to seek out somebody who can grant you a single wish to sort of make everything better. So pretty straightforward goal and setup, I would say, at the outset of this game, but one of the things that really got me into it was looking at gameplay footage online and seeing that, oh wow, this is just a really good looking game for the PSP, and I was looking for a traditional RPG experience anyways, and having now spent about 2 hours with it, I would say that it really is delivering on those fronts. The characters are enjoyable enough, the combat feels pretty easy to get into if you've at all played a JRPG before, and the presentation is just really solid. And that's the thing, when I think RPGs on the PSP, I think of like ports of Final Fantasy 1 and 2, for example, or the Persona series, but I just never heard of Brave Story, so when I discovered it and then I found a complete in-box copy at a local shop, I decided to go ahead and take the leap. I think this is one I'm really going to have fun with. And speaking of finding new things in local shops, here is another one that I found locally, and it is not a regular RPG, but rather a tactical RPG, which historically has not been a genre that I've been a huge fan of, but I'm expecting that this one might turn me around because after spending a few hours with it, I have to say I'm really loving just the way it looks, mostly because it's cel-shaded, but then also because the combat really is pretty engaging and it's not overly complex to follow, and that would be Jeanne d'Arc. Which I'm still fairly confident that I'm pronouncing incorrectly, but nonetheless, here's what some of that gameplay looks like. It does have some pretty decent voice acting. It is essentially a retelling and dramatization of the Joan of Arc story, and the combat scenarios that I've encountered so far are really fulfilling. Essentially, you could do regular combat damage, or if you can flank your enemy by positioning the active character to their side, or even better, behind them, then you have the ability to deal extra damage. And it's got a really gorgeous animated cutscene that sort of kicks everything off, and I'm actually really excited to see how the story plays out. I've heard a lot of people say that the story is its strong suit, and then I've also heard people say that the story in Jeanne d'Arc is pretty weak. Answer's probably somewhere in between, I'm not sure, but again, as somebody who's historically a huge fan of that cel-shaded kind of comic booky look, I think it really nails it, and it really does pop on the PSP screen. So if you're a fan of the tactical genre, this might be one that's worth looking into. Now, the next entry on this list is in a genre that I am more familiar with. Technically horror, but not like hardcore horror in the vein of like Silent Hill or like Manhunt or something like that, but rather a more Tim Burton-ish approach to horror, I would say, and that is Deadhead Fred. And one of the reasons I got this is because at some point I would love to do like a spookiest games to play on the PSP video. And whenever I looked up gameplay footage of this, it looked like it was equal parts creepy and just sort of fun in like a childish, spooky kind of way, right? Although I would say having now started the game, it probably earns its M rating, and while I thought it looked kind of childish and goofy in the vein of like maybe like medieval or something like that, it's decidedly more adult, and I was kind of shocked to see that, oh, this is about a detective who gets killed by a mob boss, and this crazy scientist who works for him has managed to reanimate you, albeit without your head, and you have a variety of powers depending on what head you equip. It got real weird real fast. Now I will say my brief time playing it so far, like some of the movement and the actions do feel a little bit clunky, but honestly the entire premise and presentation and the music are just so bizarre and off the wall that this is one that I definitely want to see through to completion. I mean, just in practice, that's just a cool thing, right? Like, oh yeah, you just change your head and you get different powers. Like, that just sounds like fun, and I'm assuming I'm gonna have a pretty good time with this game. And while I would say it's less common to run across because I had never seen it in a local shop before, it's not a super expensive game. I think you can get this for around 30 to 40 bucks. I don't think I paid more than that for it, but it's also one that not a lot of people are familiar with. I had certainly never heard of it. So yeah, having checked it out a little bit now, it's kooky, weird fun, and I'm really curious to see where the story is going to go, because man, there's just like this rogues gallery of kind of bizarre offbeat characters that, again, it really does make me feel like I'm watching like a Tim Burton flick or something like that. So yeah, Deadhead Fred, if you've never heard about it, maybe check it out, look up some videos, see if it would be your thing. Odds are if you're into like kooky, weird, kind of humorous horror, then I would imagine it would be. And speaking of kooky, weird stuff, I would say the next game on my list that you might not have heard about, and it is actually fairly cheap, I think you can get this for like $7, is Hot Pixel. Now that's not a very descriptive name, I realize, but essentially what Hot Pixel is it's a collection of microgames, not too dissimilar from the WarioWare games that you might have played on Game Boy Advance, for example, or I guess on the Wii or the Switch. Actually, there's been a lot of WarioWare games. I've missed a few of those. But anyways, I would not say that the mini or micro games in Hot Pixel really aspire to the same level of quality that you would get from something like WarioWare, but for like $5 or $6 if you're just looking for something to casually kill time with, I think it's alright. I mean, again, not the most imaginative mini games that I've ever seen or anything like that, but ultimately it does have like that kooky, weird, off-the-wall sort of look to it, and if you're looking for something just to kill a little bit of time, or you're looking for like a more arcadey experience that doesn't require a ton of thought like a story-rich RPG or a very character-driven action game, Hot Pixel might be a good game for taking a quick break here and there. But yeah, it's one of those games I don't ever remember coming out. Like, I feel like it just came and went instantly. Now, as I understand it, critically it did not do very well when it came out, and I can see why. I mean, if you had games like, you know, WarioWare micro games to compare against, a game that obviously is an extremely high quality game, and you are expected to pay like $30 or $40 for this back in the day when it first launched, I can see why people were kind of turned off by that. But in the modern day, in like 2022, if you find it for like $5 or $6, is it worth it? I think so. I mean, again, not the best games I've ever seen or anything like that, but it's got style for days, and as a budget title, I think it's one that's worth having in your collection. But yeah, again, I wouldn't expect like bombastic, over-the-top brilliance here in terms of like, you know, minigame collections you've probably seen before. But I mean, if you find it dirt cheap, I think Hot Pixel's worth a look. But speaking of more action-heavy fare, I did want to go ahead and end this on more of an action note, and this would be a game that I remember coming out, and I remember playing it when it came out, and I really enjoyed it, and it just sort of got lost to the sands of time for me, but I started replaying it recently, and I love that it's split up into like a mission-based structure, which makes it very easy to hop in for just, again, quick pick-up and play sessions, and that is Pursuit Force. Pursuit Force is just shameless, over-the-top, action movie, popcorn fun. You essentially play as somebody who's a member of an elite pursuit force, and it's your job to sort of chase down criminals across a variety of different missions, and you do this by chasing them down in cars, but then while you're chasing them down and shooting at them and essentially trying to make sure that you can race to these next destinations, whether it's because you're in pursuit of a criminal directly, or if you have to get like a certain spot to progress the story, you have the ability to jump to different cars as well, so it's really just this on-rails sort of ridiculously over-the-top action fare. And if you're somebody who appreciates that kind of gameplay and you're looking for something that is not going to have a story that's going to be absolutely riveting, right? This is not a game that's intended to, you know, give you some deeper insight into the human condition. But if you're looking for something that's just dopey, over-the-top, action fun, Pursuit Force will absolutely provide that. There are a ton of different criminals that you can track down across a variety of different missions, and it does make sure to give you like a post-action report of how well you did in a very arcadey way. And this is a game that just, it runs great on the PSP, and it's one that I had a lot of fun with back in the day, and firing it up now like, what, 15 years later? And that, even that might be being conservative, it still holds up really well. So, you know, if you've never heard of this game, I don't think anybody could fault you, which is weird because it was like a Sony release, right? I think this was done by like Sony Studios, but it's just one of those games that when you look at lists of, you know, the best PSP games, you don't see it there very often. And again, this is a game that is not overly expensive. I think you can get it for about 10, 15 bucks, I want to say is what I found it for at a local shop when I reacquired and added it into my collection. But yeah, if you're looking for something that's more action heavy, but it does not suffer because of the lack of a second analog stick on the PSP, and it's sort of like an on-rails experience, Pursuit Force is worth a look. Alright, so that's it for this video. Really, I just wanted to showcase some of the lesser-known entries from the PSP library that are in my own collection. But hey, what about you? Do you have any suggestions if you're a PSP fan? What's something that, you know, was not a mainstream entry that you think someone would get a ton of enjoyment out of? If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear it. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch these videos. It means a lot. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next one.